aerospace and defense manufacturing,
machines and automation,
additive manufacturing,
smart manufacturing,
global manufacturing economy.
Welcome to Advanced Manufacturing Now, the podcast for manufacturing professionals, powered by SME. From the design screen to the shop floor to final assembly, we drive the conversation about making manufacturing smarter by connecting people who are passionate about manufacturing.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Jason Gorey from Stifel Financial. I'm joined by Patrick Gaughan and Tim Osterhaus. And we're here to talk about what small and medium-sized manufacturers need to know to be able to grow. I'll start by letting my guests introduce themselves. So, Patrick, do you want to give a little background about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Patrick Gaughan. I am a lifelong engineer. I spent my first career working for a Fortune 100 company. In that role, I spent most of my time probably in process engineering, spent fair bit of time in global supply chain as well as quality systems. But in 1996, I got my Lean Six Sigma black belt, and that allowed me to practice internally with the location that I was in. And we had some great successes as part of that initiative, and that spun off to other facilities around the globe. And that allowed me to be able to see the world and teach others about Lean Six Sigma globally. So I had a chance to travel to places like India and China, Europe, Central America, North America. And in that, I became somewhat of an evangelist for the lean principles around the world. And so that follows me to today. I retired from that company, started my own company, did consulting for a number of years, met some very interesting people who are looking to step out on their own and build a company. And that became Axiom. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years. So out of retirement, back into doing what I love, and I'm passionate about, which is the engineering piece.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick. And Tim?
Yes, Tim Osterhaus. Been in aerospace, automotive, and industrial for years and years. Like Patrick, I too have my Six Sigma black belt and live and breathe the tools that are embedded in Lean. It's something that's absolutely required for a business to run well. And businesses that think they're going to start up and just run well are foolish businesses. Everything has to start, and then continuous improvement happens forever. And there are very, very few silver bullets. So in my career, was bounced around by a company called Barnes Group for a number of years to sell several of their plants that were failing. And typically the plant itself wasn't fully failing, but they had taken on new work that was outside of their core competence. And that just about crushed the businesses. So we would spend time in the business fixing it, getting it up and running, and applying all these lean tools to where the business was then running well. And then they proceeded to move me from plant to plant. So I've been in Ohio and Switzerland and Brighton and Connecticut, all with the Barnes Group, just fixing production launch problems. So with that, yeah, I'm excited to be here.
That's wonderful. And yeah, thank you again for both your time. I guess I'll give a little more background about myself as well. So Jason Gorey, Stifel Financial. Most of my background is actually not finance, but rather defense innovation, technology, transition, commercialization, both inside the government and the Pentagon, as well as outside, helping advise small, medium-sized companies access those government dollars to bring new technologies to bear. Last year, I co-founded a private equity fund with Stifel Financial and one of its wholly owned subsidiaries, North Atlantic Capital. And our private equity fund is entirely focused on small, medium-sized manufacturers in America and helping them grow via adding advanced technologies, so advanced manufacturing capabilities, especially in the area of metal additive manufacturing. So that's our entire focus, and we are still in the fundraising stage through October of this year, although we are also able to make investments. And we just announced our first investment about a month and a half ago, I believe, in Centavia, which is a metal additive company for defense aerospace. So let's get started. And with podcasts, I know people listening in, they really want to get to the the answers right up front. So I'll ask first if there's one piece of advice that maybe you wish you knew 20 years ago, or that you would give to a company right now, what would that be? And I'll start with Tim.
Oh yeah, that's pretty simple. It's communication. It's learning how to get your shop floor employees, who are your bread and butter, the people who know the process, to communicate upwards to management and for management to listen to them. And we deployed tools like real-time problem resolution sheets. So just something for the operators to be able to write down their wants and needs, and for supervisors then to walk by it every single day and make sure that they're taking care of the people on the floor. So often the shop floor and the supervisors, they do communicate, but it gets busy and the supervisor doesn't intentionally fail to do things for the shop floor. But when they do, the shop floor loses trust. So simply by getting it on a board and acting on it every single day, and with leadership going to the floor at least once a day, every single day, to make sure this stuff is getting done, provides the team on the shop floor confidence that their leadership is actually listening.
Excellent. And Patrick?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to take a page from Tim's book in a way, and that is when I first started doing lean manufacturing initiatives, we used a very specific methodology that was much more prevalent than others, and that was doing rapid improvement workshops. And in doing that, we engaged the workforce, the folks that actually do the work, in executing on a workshop. So we would be instrumental internally as facilitators to define what the target area was, what was inbounds, out of bounds, making sure that we provided resources that the team would need. But the primary focus was to take the folks who do the job on a daily basis, put them in a room, teach them about lean principles so that they could see things differently than they did walking in the door, and then empower them to be able to do whatever it is that they thought needed to be done to help further advance along the goal pathway that we had identified as part of the setup to the workshop. And in that, every single time we would do an event, the plant manager would come in at the start of the event within the first 5 minutes and declare there's only 2 requirements that we have. And one is that everything is, from a safety perspective, is the same or better when we're done with this, and that the quality going out to our customers is the same or better when we're done with this. And as long as you do those 2 things and don't substitute money for brains, in other words, don't tell me I need this $10 million solution that's not going to happen for the next 5 years, but really be creative and think about what you need to do, and at the same time create safe space for failure, because in a robust environment where you're really trying to experiment and do new things, things are going to go wrong, and it's all about fail forward fast to be able to move the ball forward. And once the plant manager set that tone, everything worked out incredibly well because we were engaging the right people. And I think that's probably the biggest single message I can give any business, is that when you engage people the right way with the right tools, fantastic things can happen. And we saw that in the first plant that I started at before it became an international endeavor. We were at 15 days of cycle time. We took it down to about 3.25 over the course of the first 6 to 12 months, which to your listeners out there, that's about a 5X on capacity. Now, there's a whole series of constraints that go along with that, so it's not quite that simple. But from an equipment standpoint, we created that. And that's what got the attention of folks globally, and they wanted to do the same thing. So in a nutshell, it's to act with a team mindset like Tim talked about, and make sure you create safe space for people to be able to experiment.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that if you don't mind. It's super key, as Patrick said, to get your team engaged. Make sure you stop and understand current state. They're doing things for a reason, the way they're doing it today, before you go developing a future state. Make sure your team is being trained the lean tools prior to implementing them and prior to assessing current and future state, so that they actually have a solid hand in the solution, because then they will own it. If we tell our teams what to do, it's way different than if they're agreeing to do stuff because they've came up with the solution. All we did was guided them to that solution. Now they're empowered. Now they're going to knock it out of the park.
Excellent. And I think it's really interesting that, so the topic is manufacturing, small business manufacturing, and both of you really focused on the personnel aspect, the communication and the team aspect. And I think that's obviously correct, but maybe not intuitive to someone who's not day-to-day working in manufacturing. So on the personnel front, one of the difficulties that I hear about every single day is recruitment, and also the fact that the workforce in manufacturing is older. Some of them aging out. Some of that talent and the knowledge resource is leaving. So, do you have any advice on how a business owner, business manager can approach the personnel, the talent acquisition piece, as well as that knowledge transfer and training? Patrick?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of aspects to this. And one is, how do you go out and attract talent in the manufacturing space? And I'm going to approach this from the other side of that coin, which is, how do you drive people away from manufacturing? Because I've seen the other side of it. And so what you're going to find is that, there's a generational difference, right? So I was not uncommon when I grew up through an organization, spent the vast majority of my adult working career in one place and retired from a company. Those days are long gone, right? For a whole host of reasons. But one of the reasons that I saw it with my own eyes towards the end of my career was that we got a lot of young, talented people that came into the organization, and they became frustrated that when they started to work in these archaic and arcane systems that we older folks kind of assimilated into, because we came from paper. So anything from paper in the digital world seems a whole lot better. But in fact, for young people today, everything that they need to do, they do with these phones, right? And they have them with them all the time. And so if your business doesn't have immediate access to data and systems that just move seamlessly within what they do on a day-to-day basis, they will become frustrated, and they will vocalize their problems. And if you're not willing to actually adapt to create an environment where these tools become more prevalent, people will leave. So you can get and attract all sorts of talented people. But if you don't have systems that are contemporary and are in some way influenced by the people who are doing the job, you're going to find yourself in a constant hamster wheel of replacing people. Sure, you can go find good people, but when they don't stay, in the old days, it was that they left because of their manager. And I think that to a large extent, that's still true. But I saw a lot of people leave because the systems were just really poorly designed. And I think that's, maybe an uncommon way to kind of answer your question a little bit, is that we've got to think about business a little differently than we used to decades ago if we want to be able to attract young people coming in and then to be able to keep them.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And Tim, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I second what Patrick said. When I arrived in the Swiss plant, we had signs all over the community because it was a really small community. Need help, need help, need help. We focused so much on the people that when I left, that we had a sign saying no longer taking applications. And to Patrick's comment, you can go out and hire the best of the best, but when they come in the environment, if they don't like the environment, they're not going to last. So people quit people. That's just a truth. And when you're looking around your organization, if you don't buy into the fact that people quit people, you've already lost the battle. So you've got to get your place, a place that people want to come to work. Now hiring the talent becomes much easier because it'll come to you. The word on the street, especially in smaller communities, gets around. So as soon as people quit one of your leaders in your organization, that's cancer in the community. But when you've got a place where people want to go to work, where you got a stack of resumes, that comes from a company that takes care of their people.
I think that's absolutely correct, yes. And this is not our first conversation that we've had on this topic. If I recollect correctly, we previously mentioned on personnel, it's so important to focus on buy-in and sort of understanding an employee's role in the overall picture, right? So it's not exactly the Ford assembly line here where they're just doing one tiny thing. Usually, especially in smaller manufacturers, you're kind of all over the place. But ensuring that, especially those new employees, they understand how important what they're doing is to the overall picture, understand those more strategic goals that they're not working on a day-to-day basis. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is really understanding their value and showing that appreciation, I think, is absolutely essential for retaining personnel.
I'd like to add one more piece to that because I think it's germane to the discussion, and that is the other part of being able to keep talent is creating a space that people want to come into work to do something, right? And so oftentimes people think about manufacturing as being the same thing over and over again, and to a certain extent that can be true. But one of the things that really differentiates the good to great is that the great folks take the time to listen to the people that come into the organization and recognize that their experience is different than everyone else's. And in that difference, oftentimes is where the magic lives, right? They see things differently. They've experienced things differently. And if we listen closely enough and tap into that, right, suddenly you can start to unlock that creative endeavor, which is really what I think most humans actually crave, which is give me a chance to be creative and to do some things that are different than the day-to-day. It doesn't mean that a vast majority of your time isn't spent doing maybe redundant things, and that's fine. That's what we do. They call it work for a reason. But if they can express that creativity in a way that helps to benefit them and their coworkers, I think that's a big value add for folks.
Yeah, if I may chime in, some of the factories that I've been in, everybody talks Gemba, and I do agree with Gemba and Gemba boards. But I went to one that was in Elkhart, Indiana, and the Gemba boards were designed specifically for upper management, when in fact, if you're going to follow safety, quality, delivery, and cost on your Gemba boards, that Gemba board needs to talk and give the people on the shop floor a barometer or a bellwether check on whether or not their department's doing well or not. Then they will step it up and show you what they need to change that metric. But if they don't understand the data, they can't change the metric. They can't move the needle, if you will, in that organization.
And how about the training and sort of workforce knowledge, or the knowledge transfer aspect of it? If I'm a company leader, how do I think about dedicating time to training, to workforce development when, I have 50 orders that need to get out the door? How do I go about making that balance work to ensure we're successful in the future and not just getting those 50 orders, made?
Yeah, and I can speak from experience in that, having managed teams of engineers, and I understand that's not necessarily the manufacturing folks, but I think the same logic applies. We built into our annual, I'll call it a budget, if you will, for every employee that there were X number of hours of personal development, and I ensured that all of my employees took full advantage of all of that. And if they wanted to do more, they would do more. And I fully encourage that, because in the education process is where there's a lot of magic that happens. And that empowers people to work in spaces that they previously had no experience in, or and maybe they even had an expressed interest in it, but they just didn't have the background to be able to do it. They can start to explore things and reach out and do things in a way that previously they could never have done before. So I think that's part of the story. And I think that there's certainly other methods and tools that you can use to be able to help with that. But I think it's having that commitment that you've defined at the start of every year, that everyone's going to have a certain component of that. Now, you may not know exactly when that's going to land, but typically businesses have down cycles, right? And so you take full advantage of down cycles, whether it's going to be equipment changeover or the educational piece or some combination thereof. And I think it's about just being very focused and strategic about it, and then committing to it.
Tim, do you have anything to add on the training?
Yeah, I do. When you start a small business, you don't have a document control system. You don't have so many things in your organization, but that doesn't mean that you can't start. You create a folder, you listen to your team. When you have something that you're struggling with, you go work with that operator and you capture what they're doing and create that standard work. And then you can train others to that standard work. What you're doing as you're going through that process is you're slowly capturing the knowledge from the people on the shop floor. And, I call it a silver tsunami when you have an entire organization that's going to retire in the next 5 years. It's at that point, I don't want to say it's too late, but you should have already been developing those training modules, which I call standard work because they're one and the same. It's how to use a micrometer, how do you read a vernier caliper, these little things, and don't make them complicated, because the shop floor, especially today's today's generation, they don't want to read a bunch of text. They just want a very simple how-to. And they'll read it. They YouTube everything to figure out how to do things. So they'll do the same thing inside the organization if you have it. So I would say keep it simple, but keep it intentional. Make sure that management and leadership takes time to generate a work training document once per week or month or whatever it is. Put it in the annual review per Patrick's conversation. But in this case, you're putting it on the supervisors and the leaders on the shop floor to create that standard work. Don't try to create it in an office. It's not going to work. You're going to have to create that standard work, like I said, with the employee. When they're helping you write that standard work, you're writing it at their level. You're talking to the people on the floor at that point. So therefore, they will have buy-in and understand and therefore follow the standard work.
Jason, Tim spoke about something that's really mission critical, and that is standard work. Without that, businesses will not thrive. It just doesn't happen. And the good news part of that story is that there is, that was interesting to hear the what'd you call it, the silver tsunami?
Yes.
Tim? Yeah. And I guess I find myself being part of that, but, there's a lot of commitment that goes into being able to create and maintain standard work historically. The good news part of that story is that there are some AI tools out there today that make that profoundly easier to be able to assemble and put together, number one, and number two, to be able to present back to the people that need it. So if you think about, and probably the vast majority of your listeners out there have participated and worked with things like Anthropic or ChatGPT or Grok or what have you, right? And there are going to be a number of AI tools that will provide people with just the piece of information that they need when they need it, right there on the shop floor when they need it, when the time is appropriate. So that's part of what we call the 5S of information flow: what I need, where I need it, when I need it, in the form that I need it. And those tools didn't exist just a few years ago. And so that's a very exciting space that's opening up that minimizes the administrative burden on the folks that have to create it, but also maximizes its effectiveness by delivering it where it needs to be at the time it needs to be delivered. And that's really pretty cool.
So on that sort of implementing new tools, implementing new technology, how does a business owner go about that process? How do they, and anytime you invest in something, you're taking a little bit of risk. You're spending money in one area that could go to another. How is that decision process? What makes it effective? What are some pitfalls that can happen in assessing and implementing new technologies, new processes to a workflow?
ChatGPT is a great conversation here. I'm not a guy who used it a lot until the past several weeks. And I now need a safety program here because we're not Michigan OSHA compliant. So I use ChatGPT, and I'm telling you what, I had a complete document written in a minute. I mean, it was crazy fast. So that cost me nothing. So you got to start with the cheap, if you will, and then you will morph into things that are maybe cost the business a few more dollars. But at that point, you can assess whether or not the ROI is there. But standard work, I will reiterate again, as Patrick did as well, that these people on the shop floor, they want these standards. So whether it's GPT, whether it's on the back of a napkin, I don't care. The people on the shop floor are willing to do what they're asked to do. And so often when there's a failure on the shop floor, we go right after the employee, when 99.9% of the time it's the process. So if you go follow the process and look for the failure, you get to tweak a sentence in the process or put a visual in there so the operator actually sees it instead of you thinking they're going to read it because they're just going to glass eyes over that document. But if that document's got pictures in it, they'll look at it, they'll understand it. So yeah, take every nonconformance, I would say, as an opportunity. In the shops that I've been working on, every single nonconformance turned into a revised procedure. And that could be a sentence, a paragraph, a graphic, whatever that is. But for crying out loud, when you have a nonconformance, embrace it as an opportunity and not as a complaint. Use it as an opportunity to fix a problem that's on the floor that these guys are probably complaining about anyway. They just want their, I say it this way, the hourly workforce wants to come in, they're willing to come into work and do an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. What they don't want to do is go home frustrated. And they will go home frustrated based on people and based on the process that they're trying to run. So if we listen to the people, if we use every nonconformance as an opportunity to fix our standard work, it just happens over time. So don't try to eat the elephant all at once. Eat it one bite at a time and work on I call it a Pareto analysis. Pareto is your 80-20 rule. 80% of your problems lie in 20% of what you're doing on the shop floor. So whenever you have a problem, don't just fix it, truly fix it in your system and make it something that the next guy won't screw up. You can error proof, you can mistake proof. I mean, there's a lot of tools that we can use to update that standard work. But what I found is just listen to the operators. They know what they need to fix. They often don't know how to fix it, but they're complaining about something that's real. Therefore, we should, as leaders, both fix it and upgrade our standard work and just call that business normal. And a year from now, you're going to have your standard work and you're not even going to know how it happened.
I think that is a tremendous takeaway to take a non-conform, to take a failure and actually spend a little bit of time analyzing why. Don't just assume that the person failed in some way, that there's probably a why there, and fix that for not just that one issue, but for the future. Such an amazing point. Patrick, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think in terms of evaluating technology and whatnot, to me, everything that I've ever done from an engineering perspective always started with detailed process mapping. So understand what the current state is. And this, of course, aligns to exactly what Tim was talking about, which is the standard work piece. And once you've detailed every single aspect of every process, you'll have a level of understanding of the business that you've never had before. And from that, you can start to evaluate, what does anything that I do cost me based on the number of occurrences that aggregate over the course of a year, and anything that I evaluate, from be that from a software or an equipment and hardware standpoint or a change in a procedure, I can evaluate against those detailed process maps, and I can act with a surety that I know that I can afford what it is that I'm looking at to be able to make that change and drive that home. One of the challenges with that, however, is that especially as you start to work with machine makers, they oftentimes will sell you a machine to perform a function, but they don't necessarily provide access to the data from the machine itself to be able to help you understand how it fits into your ecosystem and what kind of return does it actually provide, what kind of shortcomings are going to happen, and how do I start to remedy those. And so that's a place where we at Axiom see a lot of opportunity, is to work with folks that have machines that seem a bit inaccessible to the data structure that you currently have available, and open those up in a variety of different ways to be able to understand what you can do with those things to help integrate them into your business. We worked with a machine manufacturer recently, and just because they were tuning cameras on the process and studying it, they found that they were losing $200,000 a year just on one machine, based on some opportunities to improve certain processes that they did every single day and never really thought too much about them, except that once they looked at it and said, well, wait a minute, that is a very short duration, but it happens many hundreds of times per day. And when you add that up, it turns into a lot of money. The point is, if you have enough data, you can always make an informed decision. You don't want to have too much. You don't want to have too little. It's finding that sweet spot that allows you to be able to figure out, what are my goals? What do I need to hit? And having the data to be able to support that and back that up. And so I encourage everyone, be proficient in process mapping, because that's job number one, in my opinion.
I think that's great. And so you mentioned it on the sort of machine side. When you're adding something new, it's usually, I would say, not going to be, ready to go from day one. There's a lot of learning, a lot of test and evaluation that needs to happen. How about on the software side? I know that when we spoke previously, something that I took away from the conversation, that I'm going to far less eloquently state, was you want to make, as a business owner, you want to make software acquisitions, bring software to bear that works for the personnel, actually, makes their job easier rather than having them have to adapt to using the software. And I'll give one example from just my personal experience, and I've heard others state this as well. And not to beat up on Salesforce, I think it's a great tool for some, but I've found in trying to implement Salesforce in a previous company that I ran, just so labor intensive. I think we had to make 4 additional hires just to operate Salesforce and get it into a form that was actually usable by the rest of the employees. And that was not anticipated at all. It took probably 6 months longer than we thought, and cost, again, we had to hire 4 full-time people to operate the software. So do you have any advice on, I guess, sourcing and implementing the background software tools that help organize and operate your company, Patrick?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time on that actually, because I think if you're a large company like where me and my partners came from, we typically had the big names that were out there, right? Oracle, SAP, those types of things. And it's easy to make an easy decision if you're a big business with lots of money. The problem is that oftentimes those big decisions that seem so easy because on paper it looked great end up becoming awful when they get deployed in your business, because while those tools are intended to build rigor into your business, there are times where it simply doesn't fit your business whatsoever. And suddenly you're having to do exactly what you described and hiring additional people to be less productive than what they had before. And it's really difficult for a company to realize that after the fact, but that's oftentimes where it happens. So the good news part of that story is that today we're starting to see a huge influx of new software systems that are very much purpose-built. Everything from the core SCADA layer that interfaces with all of the hardware and whatnot, all the way through the middleware, MES solutions up to ERP and all the subsystems that sit at that same layer. And there is an incredible amount of innovation that's happening. I think in large part, just as Tim talked about, with the use of AI, because in the past, it was always the time it took to actually write the code that was the limit to things. And now AI is making that supremely faster and far more efficient. And I think we're starting to see a lot of innovation happening in that space. It's A, bringing costs down, B, getting rid of the old methodical way of thou shalt conform to my software because that's the way we do it. We need to be okay for everyone and not great for anyone, right? I think those days are starting to go by the wayside. And so it's a very exciting time from that perspective. I think the biggest challenge that folks have today is the courage to dip their toes in the water and say, I'm starting to make a strategic move. And in that, we encourage you to talk to folks outside of your organization and find out what's out there. Find a trusted advisor, listen to them, look at samplings of what's out there, but eventually make a decision and start down your journey.
Yeah, and when you get a chance, and if you can, ask them for a customer list and go ask their customers, are you happy with the software? And I'll say one last thing to the software is don't hesitate to walk away. There's a point where you spiral and you try so hard to make something work, and you got to stop and look in the mirror and say, is the juice worth the squeeze? And sometimes it's not. You got to learn to just walk away.
So I think that's a great point. And you both brought up sort of taking a step back, thinking about things. Patrick, you specifically said, strategically. One thing that I personally, as I've started a couple of companies and led them, I have always struggled with, or at least going into sort of the strategic thinking sessions, the annual review type piece, I've always, for some reason, dreaded going into it. And but afterward, I've always been just so impressed and so happy with what's come out. Do you guys have any suggestions or tips? Well, I guess number one, I think we would all agree that it is supremely important to dedicate a couple of days annually, probably quarterly, honestly, to take a step back and think strategically with your leadership team on where you are today, what's right, what's wrong, what needs to be improved, and also where you want to go in the 3-5 year time frame. Do you have any suggestions or advice on how to effectively look at that annual process and execute it, Tim?
Sure do. If you certainly got to look at annual, and then you do a 1, 3, 5 year projection of what you would like to accomplish, and then you have to put together, make sure you've got the team in the room that all agrees to that projection, and then come up with what we call them rocks. They're just big to-dos that you're going to review annually and or quarterly, and then make sure that your rocks, then your big to-dos are flowing down into smaller to-dos that you're keeping your eyes on every week or at least every month. And it doesn't mean that they're long, drawn-out, off-site meetings. The monthly regroups should just be, are you on or off? And just making sure the team is staying laser-focused on what they're trying to do. But by doing this as leadership, you're giving them small bites every month or every quarter instead of this great big task that seems undaunting. Yet when you break it down into smaller bites, you can get it accomplished. So I've seen this work very effectively, but it comes back to communication. Now it's communication at a leadership level, but it definitely comes back to communication, an intentional process written and followed on how you're going to accomplish this that everybody has already agreed to. And you just go execute.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in having established strategic meetings that are conducted in a very orderly fashion. So imagine, if you will, you've got your shift-to-shift handoffs, and those should be done in highly structured. It's not time for an open conversation. It's a checklist of things that you go through to hand off between shifts. And then each day have another meeting, and you're starting to build off the same type of metrics with each one of these layers, right? And daily, it's the management folks talking about where they're at relative to their business units or what have you. That then turns into a weekly roll-up. So again, there's no surprises along the way. You're probably still at a meeting that's less than 30 minutes at that point. And then that rolls into a monthly, and then a quarterly, and an annual. So the meetings will get a little bit longer in duration, which with each one of those series, but they should all have data that builds on each other, right? Because ideally, you're going to set the strategy once a year with your business strategy review, and then that's going to cascade down however you use that, whether you're doing X matrix or whatever tools you happen to use to drive that down to the tactical layer. And in doing that, there's never, ever a surprise about where you're at or where you're headed, because the folks that really do need to step away from, the 1,000-foot view and set the course for where you want to go with strategic investment and how you're going to start to attack the market and those types of things. That eventually, though, cascades all the way down to the folks who are actually effectuating that change and rolling up their performance back up. And in that rolling back up is what gets back to the folks at the top to say, hey, there's a little course correction that needs to happen to be able to hit those metrics that we identified on an annual basis. And that just becomes a self-fulfilling operation, if you will, to be able to execute in that fashion. And so it requires intentional design, right, to set up each one of those meetings. It requires commitment to be able to do it in a very short time frame. I mean, the vast majority of these are going to be like in the 10 to 30 minute time frame, so it has to be very quick. And it teaches people about how to actually become proficient in managing the business on their own behalf, right, as they're sharing information with others around them. So that's my suggestion, is have a series of those meetings that are structured.
That's a great approach. On the sort of quarterly, annual review topic, another thing that I've always dreaded, whether I'm being reviewed or doing the review, is the personnel quarterly, annual reviews, and I think it's something that doesn't get talked about a lot, or information being shared about it, maybe because of the privacy aspects and things. You don't want to get into the individual cases. But do you guys have any suggestions or advice on how to effectively use the review process, the individual personnel review process, both in retention as well as individual improvement and your overall success as a company. Patrick, do you want to start out?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a very specific example, and this is going to be slightly off the reservation, but it's one that has stuck with me and I'll never forget. So I was at the time managing a quality department, and we had a team of, I think, about 54 people, and they were all doing a variety of different jobs. They were all interconnected. It was a very complex process, and it was very hard to gauge the performance of the overall department. And so we broke every task down, and we put time bands around what it would take to do those things correctly. And what we did is we put that up on visual boards that everyone could see. Now, we didn't put people's names in there. It was obfuscated. So each person knew what their identity was on that board, but they didn't know who anyone else was. All they knew is where they were ranked in that. And so one of the things that was kind of interesting, and we call this gamification, right? Having worked in a number of different countries around the world, every country is a little bit different in terms of the receptiveness. But generally in the United States, it's been my experience that we like to compete. And one of the things that I found most intriguing about this process once we put it in play was there was a person that came to me after the first week and we did the review and said, and this is a person with tears in their eyes, said, it's impossible that that's my ranking. And we walked through every bit of it and said, is there something here that we're not reporting this the right way? And this person said, nope, this is absolutely correct. I didn't realize we went to this level of detail. It is what it is. And I said, okay, so let's talk about what we can do to get the rocks out of the way so that you can become a better performer. And this is one of the most tenured people in the department. And this person said to me, listen, I know what the problem is. I never focused on the fact that this was important to the business. And therefore, I didn't conduct my business daily in a way that I should. And I will forever be off of that bottom tier, and you're going to find me at the top. And I said, okay, fantastic. That's great. But if you need something, let me know so we can help to get the rocks out of the way. Nope, no problem. The very next week, that person comes in shining. They got their report in their hand. I am number one in that space, and I will never look back. The message in all of that was when you can take your least performing person in a department and rise them up to number one, and everybody else is looking right at where they're at in the position and whatnot, you suddenly start to transform the way that you actually start to do business. And it's something that's very uncommon, I think, for folks to take that approach, but at least from my experience, I thought it was very well done to be able to do that. And I've never forgotten the lessons that I learned from that exercise.
That's really interesting. I really like the gamification approach. That's fantastic. Tim, anything you want to add?
Yeah, absolutely. Annual reviews are something that people need. They just need it. They need the feedback, and I would suggest that every leader in the world should be giving feedback regularly so that in the review, it's not a surprise. You don't want to have a surprise problem in a review. That doesn't mean you don't put the negatives in the review. But I think a review has to be balanced. I mean, it has to have both pros and cons of what's going on throughout the year with this individual. And I think it needs to be categorized so that you can break it down, the review down, to tell them how is their performance, how is their quality, how is their coming to work on time, and all the basics, but both pluses and minuses, and keep this a real document because that person wants to grow. And, back to the data on the Gemma boards I spoke of earlier, if you just pencil whip a review, you're telling that person that they're not important, and that doesn't work. And frankly, I've learned over the years that it's not a money thing as much as it's a honesty thing. These folks are really looking for honest feedback so that they can change, right? They're going to look to improve, just like doing a proper root cause and corrective action and updating your standard work. These folks want to know what they're not performing at and what they need to do to get to that performing level. I put a guy in a performance improvement plan once, and he was really, really frustrated with me, but it was really clearly laid out. And I sent him home and said, need you to develop an action plan on how to fix this. And truly was a guy that I was expecting to come in with a submachine gun and, blow the doors off the building. He was just a very high strung, super intelligent engineer He came back on Monday and his shirt was tucked in and he was formal when he went in my office, and he stood there and he stretched his hand out. And I'm like, okay, I'm confused. What's going on here? He goes, I owe you an apology, Mr. Osterhaus. Okay, you never called me that. He goes, I took your performance improvement plan to my girlfriend on Friday, and I was so frustrated. And she read it, and she looked at me and said, this completely describes you. I don't understand why you're frustrated. This is real. And he came back with an understanding that he had never had before. He had been told these things, and sometimes just putting it in writing gives that person a chance to look in the mirror and look at themselves and self-reflect. And he was a fantastic employee after that. It was a complete 180 change for that person.
Wow, that's great to hear these anecdotes that can show how effective and successful that process could be. For my own personal experience, I found that the review process can highlight leadership potential from an individual. As you're talking to them about their day to day, it puts you in an environment that is not the typical day to day where work is getting done, everyone's focused on something else, and you're actually connecting with them on a different level and understanding what their not just goals are for the day or for the week, but their ultimate, career goals and where they want to go. And I've really been able to identify, surprisingly, some leaders, some people that went on to become, much more senior in my companies than I would have expected, based on that review process. And just talking to them about how they view their roles, the roles of their peers, their leadership, and the company as a whole, you could really get an understanding of where they're coming from and the growth opportunities on an individual level, I think there.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, Jason, there's a real key that gets missed by a lot of companies, and that's make sure you're mentoring your rising stars. I mean, I use a small book called Monday Morning Leadership, but it's just 8 chapters and it's an intentional 8 weeks. We talk about a chapter a week, but it's really kind of cool that you have top performers, you have bottom performers, and you got middle performers. Which one do you focus on? Well, often in businesses, the top performers are the ones that you give all the work to because they're going to get it done. That's a problem because now the bottom performers let you do it, number one. And then pretty soon, who quits your business? Who's the first people to leave? It's your top performers. So you got to be careful not to overload your top performers, but in parallel with that, you've got to be focused on your middle and your bottom performers. The bottom performers might be on performance improvement plans or simple conversations, and your middle performers, they might be the ones that are, going to be your future. So you got to develop those guys to be leaders. They don't just come out of the womb as a leader. Leadership is something that is trained and taught and known. So give them the tools and guide, lead, and teach them along their journey to become great leaders.
That's so important, especially when we're talking about manufacturing and a lot of engineers and, people that have been focused on the technical side of things, but maybe not the communication and the leadership mentoring side of things. So bring it back a little bit more strategic, and I think we're going to wrap up in just a few minutes. As companies look to grow, I think a necessary piece of that is taking risks. So, coming from the finance perspective here, my view is largely capital risks. So taking on debt, equity, maybe joint venture type of opportunities. How can a business effectively evaluate taking on, in this case, say financial risk to grow their company? What goes into that thought process? And maybe if there are some examples of successes or failures or mistakes that you want to highlight, that might be an effective way to communicate this.
I think the best example I can think of that from personal experience is we were in a position where we had 0% market share in a particular industry. where I worked, we made coatings for the automotive market. And there was a lot of discussion about going to water-based coatings to paint cars. And I think in general, it was thought about as a laughable possibility because solvent-based have been prevalent for, 100 years. And it wasn't until we looked at it very closely and decided that the raw material costs were going to be more expensive. And the process was prohibitive in terms of being far more sophisticated and in terms of its requirements to be able to make these coatings, and that if we didn't do something completely different, we were never going to make it. And so we actually put together a team of people, myself being on that team, and created a work unit that said evaluate every single aspect of what it takes to make this successful and do things different than has ever been done before. And in that, we created a continuous flow cell to manufacture these coatings in a way that we went from 0% market share to, I think, 75% in North America over the course of the next 5 years. And it became the linchpin for a global business unit that was probably worth $1 billion. And the big lesson from that is sometimes it's not just about taking that next step forward and doing what you did today. It's about looking at every single aspect, including how you manage your accounting for that. So we had separate accounting for it, to be able to demonstrate the true capability of what innovation can do in a business and how it can be a resounding success when done correctly. I'm sure that for every story, there's probably 100 of other ones that didn't quite make it, right? But in our case, we were highly successful. And it's something that I think all of us would gladly do again, in spite of the 18-hour work days and 7-day weeks that went into actually making that a reality.
Yeah, I'll chime into that quickly, and that is, allow yourself to fail, allow your team to fail. Otherwise, the frustration when you do fail is overwhelming. Here at the current company I'm at, we bought a piece of equipment to take care of a customer's high volume, and we spent $500,000 in that piece of equipment, and that deal fell through for that volume of parts. So we immediately pivoted and looked for replacement product for that machine, which we were able to find because now we were hungry, right? You're humble and hungry. That's what I like to hire, people that are humble and hungry. We got humbled quickly because we didn't launch as fast as our customer had expected. And now we pivoted and we've got that gap filled already. So don't let it beat you down. Allow failure and allow yourself to course correct.
And don't get over leveraged.
And don't get over true.
So I guess looking to the future, I think that we are in a tremendously unique and interesting phase for American manufacturing right now. I think that we've been on a path for the past 50 years or so that I think most would say is not a successful future for American manufacturing at large. And it seems now we may be at a pivot point, not just because of what's going on politically, but also with technology and the ability that technology is providing, I think, to re-onshore some capabilities in production. So what is the next 5 to 10 years or 50 years, whatever you want to talk about? What does the future of American manufacturing look like? What are the changes, capabilities that you see coming on, becoming available? And I guess, for our listeners, what should they look for? How can they position themselves to take advantage of I guess, the future? Chen, you want to start?
Yeah, that's embrace the changes all the time. Get yourself out of your C-suite seat, get into the real world of going to some of these trade shows, I think has got to be number one, and getting out there all the time to find out what's new out there and be willing to try it. The future of manufacturing, we're always going to manufacture stuff. It's just going to be done faster and cheaper and more automation. Really is. So we're still going to have people to do the hourly work, but I see in the next 10 to 20 years that we're going to be producing parts, 20 times faster than we are today, and all automated and all fully embedded inspections, and everything's going to come out just hunky-dory and perfect on the other end. So I would suggest to make sure that you're investing in tech, as Patrick was saying earlier. You're going to need some tech-savvy people in the future.
And as you say, automation and implementing technology, I think one of the first things that people think about is job losses, at least or reduction in labor requirements. Maybe that's a better way to say it. But I would say from my experience, every time I've seen that process actually undertaken, it has not resulted in overall job losses for a company, and in fact usually requires more personnel and maybe different skills. But every time I've seen, especially in the automation implementation, it actually results in more jobs. So I think that's a sort of an antiquated way to look at things that I think needs to change and be embraced by people more.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of you on this topic, and I am a staunch advocate of technology, which shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. And I do think, especially as you suggested, Jason, that jobs are going to change in their type. And what I'd like to see for us in the United States is that we become the best robotics builders. We become the best at leveraging AI to be able to do things, the best at doing optimal material handling. If you look at companies like Amazon, for example, and I got to watch it grow up in front of me, you look at the way they changed the rules of the game simply by how they actually managed the bricks and mortar, which, it was seen as being to their detriment early on, and everybody wondered whether Amazon was going to actually make it as a bookseller. But there was a great notion that Jeff Bezos had about, I'll do automation of material handling in a way that no one's ever even seen before, right? And for the longest time, they were seen as the best in class in every aspect of material handling. Now that's not the case today. There's other folks that are actually blowing past them and doing things in a much more sophisticated fashion, and that's going to be the natural evolution of things. And so it's part of our ethos here in the United States is to continue to grow, and to be able to do manufacturing. It's just that the jobs are going to be a little bit different. And I think in that, there's always going to be a place for human creativity no matter what. And so all we've got to do is couple allowing the machines to do the drudgery that we as humans don't like to do, and allowing ourselves to free the mind to be able to do the things that we're really good at and we enjoy, which is the creative aspect of things. And I think if we can manage that delicate balance well and apply automation everywhere that it makes sense, because it doesn't apply everywhere, I think we're going to be just fine. I'm very bullish on American manufacturing. We've been there in the past, in part by necessity, driven by war and things like that. But I think if we can just do it because it's for the betterment of the country, I think that's a good thing as well. And I'm not a protectionist type of guy. That's not it. I don't want it to be at the expense of other countries. I've watched cities grow out of the deserts in Mexico, putting up plants there. I've watched kind of wasteland in China grow into robust manufacturing cities once we landed there. So I think having a burgeoning middle class around the world that people can earn a respectable living everywhere and they all become consumers in this world, I think is a good thing for me personally. And I think, if we want to lead the way in showing people how to do it the right way here in the United States, then God bless us. Let's go do it.
All right. Thank you. So I think we'll wrap up here. So last question or opportunity, I guess. I just want to hear any closing thoughts you guys have on this topic. So how to grow and succeed as a manufacturer. But also, if you want to talk a little bit more specifically about what your company is doing, I want to definitely give an opportunity for the listeners to hear your pitch on what you guys are doing. So, Tim, you want to start?
Yeah, embrace what I call the valley of suck. It's if you're doing what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always got. And when you try something new, just know going into it that it's going to hurt for a little while. And you'll come out of this valley with a growth plan that's superior to what you had when you went into it. Just don't do what you've always done. Find a new way. Make America awesome for manufacturing again.
That's fantastic. And do you want to talk a little bit about your company at all?
Oh, yeah. So Four Flutes Machining, we're growing like crazy right now. We're a machine shop, and running fifth axe is really difficult programming. To the conversations earlier, hiring talented people is really hard. Maintaining the people that are on the bottom of that tier, keeping them happy is really been pretty simple here. We're growing like crazy. We just added another 18,000 square feet, new machines. The work is out there. It's doable. Just find a way, and we are doing it, to automate everything so that it can run lights out. Now there's no country that can keep up with us. If we can run this product very inexpensively without human capital, and I'm not saying get rid of the people, to Patrick's point, you typically need more, not less, when you start doing what we're doing. And that's automate, and run lights out so that one person's doing the work of four, but feels like they're doing the work of a half a person.
And where are you located, and what percentage of your business is sort of, geographically co-located?
0% is geographically co-located. We're just south of Kalamazoo in Vicksburg, Michigan. Most of our work is actually Relativity or SpaceX. I mean, it's all on west coast. Some of it is in Florida. We're into medical. We're into aerospace. We achieved our 9100 certification last month, I believe, or the month prior. And we're working on Department of Defense stuff. So we're trying to be diversified, and continually growing the business. And it's really been successful, even in a small community like this, where people are everything. It's getting the right people. I have a 19-year-old who I'm starting to mentor with this week because he's a high potential individual. So I'm going to start caring for him today.
So people that know me know that I'm the king of just one more question. So I'm gonna take advantage of that. One thing that we didn't cover that I think probably our listeners are very interested in is Tim, how do you go about marketing? How do you go about customer acquisition? Because obviously that is essential to growth.
Yeah. So some of that is, going to the trade shows. We went to a trade show in Montreal. It was a business to business trade show. We got connected with our local Michigan. Patrick, you're going to have to help me out here of their acronym, but
With the MEPs?
yeah, MEPs, the small business associations. Get active in your community. The people are there. The work is there. You're not going to find it. I used to tell my daughters and my niece, I said, you're not going to go find a boyfriend working at a daycare. So get out. And, when you're working in a business like this, it's not going to be found in your office. A website's not going to find you. I'm not saying it's not important, but you're going to have to get out and mingle, and you're going to have to be a little extroverted and put yourself out there. And that's difficult for some of us engineers to be extroverted, but you go to some of these wine and dine talks, if you will, with the small business community. You're going to walk into somebody and they're going to connect you with somebody else, and you have to follow those leads. Don't think it's a door knocking situation. I don't think that works as well as just getting yourself out there. The work will come to you.
I think that's especially true in the sort of traditional manufacturing space because from a marketing, sales, B2B viewpoint, there seems to have been a lack of innovation so far in sort of the online marketplace, the B2B opportunities digitally. Hopefully we'll see some innovation coming in the next few years on that, but it really is that personal, in-person networking, interconnection for businesses, for business sales and business development for manufacturing. Patrick, so some closing thoughts and a little bit about your company and what you're doing, what services you provide.
Yeah, at Axiom, we're a group of, I'll call them long of the tooth type engineers. We're guys that have come from careers elsewhere. Myself, as I told you, I had actually retired from the first company I worked for. And so we have been around and we have seen a lot of things, and we're eager to share our knowledge with folks around us. So the way we kind of describe it is when I worked for a Fortune 100 company and we had a large, complex project to launch, I could sit around a table with 20 peers who were best in class, some best in the world at what they did, whether that was cybersecurity, IT, OT, process management, you name it, right? And everybody played their part. And that's what allowed us to be able to do some of the big things really well. You start to work with the smaller companies and you start to see that you're working with an owner or a manager who just turns the hat from one position to the next. And, that's you're looking at the same guy and he doesn't have all of that capability in-house to be able to do that. So we at Axiom seek to leverage what we do, which is from a consulting standpoint, help avoid the landmines, mine for the gold that's out there that makes things simpler on the organization, and then to help you get through that. We describe ourselves as the digital Sherpas. We're happy to carry your gear up the mountain with you if you choose. We're happy to just lead the way if that's what you want to do. Or we can carry everything up and carry you back down if you need to, if that's where you need to go. But we first are teachers, I think, as much as anything. While we consult, we try to help educate people on what right looks like and how to help them with their business. We're a bit unique in that we describe ourselves as a hybrid systems integration firm. And while we can do traditional systems integration, we have some partners that do much better at that because they're bigger and broader at it. We focus much more on the consulting and make sure that we help introduce the right players to the right resources at the right time to be able to successfully grow their businesses, like Tim's.
And what type of engagement is typical? Is it a consulting agreement that lasts years, or is it a one-off, month?
No, generally we like to forge relationships if we can. So, with a lot of systems integrators, the way they make their money is through billable hours. And what we would like to do is to kind of flip that on its ear and say, let's do things together where you're educating yourselves and getting the right talent so that you can do some of the heavy lifting and build some of the internal resources yourself and under our guidance. And we can have a fairly light-handed approach that stays with people for a period of time to help them. And they grow talent in-house that's extremely important to their success long-term. So we typically will do like a road mapping exercise to figure out where's the current state and where we headed. And then maybe similar to an engagement we're about ready to start with a fine company in Michigan, we're going to help them build a continuous improvement acumen within their organization. They seek to grow their business to double it over the course of the next few years. And that's a daunting task for folks who are already working 60 hours a week, 6 days a week, right? And so we'll engage with them and show them how to develop that internal talent and the methods and tools by which they can start that continuous improvement model themselves and be successful for decades to come. And so we kind of take the long approach. So we don't need to make a bunch of money all at once. What we'd rather do is sharing that long-term success and use this where we need to.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, gentlemen. I hope this was useful to our listeners. Patrick, if people want to get in touch with you, what's your email or contact info?
It's patrick@axiomsystems.io.
Okay. And Tim, do you want to give your contact info?
Tim.Osterhaus@4 flutesmachining.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I'm Jay Gorey at Stifel.com. If anyone has any capital needs or questions on finance, I'm always happy to engage. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.